Machiavelli, the prince of strategy. He knew the game of politics so masterfully. He said the ends will justify the means. In his world of power and unseen schemes. In the Renaissance, he played the game, crafty as a fox with no shame. He said, fortune favors the bold, you see, but it takes some cunning to make history. Now some call him a villain, others a sage, but in his time he turned the page on how to rule, to stay in control, in a world where power takes its toll. He knew the value of diplomacy and the art of war. In his ferocity, he saw the world through a different lens. Machiavelli, a man of great defense.
Welcome to another episode of Dope Interview, where we dive into the minds of historical and fictional figures to explore their thoughts and perspectives. Today, we have a truly iconic guest joining us, Niccolo Machiavelli, the Italian diplomat, philosopher, and author known for his political treatise, The Prince. Machiavelli's ideas on power, politics, and leadership have left an indelible mark on the world of political philosophy. In this unique and fictional interview, we'll have the opportunity to engage in a thought-provoking conversation with Machiavelli himself. So, without ado, let's jump into this intriguing dialogue with the master of political strategy. Niccolo Machiavelli. Machiavelli, your name is synonymous with cunning political strategy. Can you elaborate on the key principles of your political philosophy, particularly the concept of Machiavellianism?
Certainly. The concept of Machiavellianism is often associated with my name due to my work, particularly The Prince. In this political treatise, I explored the principles of effective leadership and governance during the turbulent times of the Italian Renaissance. Here are some key ideas from my political philosophy. Realism. I believed in a realistic and pragmatic approach to politics. Instead of prescribing idealistic moral principles, I argued that leaders should base their decisions on a clear understanding of the real world, which often involves difficult choices and compromises. And the ends justify the means. One of the most famous ideas attributed to me is the notion that the ends justify the means. This means that leaders may need to use various methods, including deception or force, to achieve their goals and maintain stability or power. Political expertise. I emphasize the importance of political expertise and astute leadership. Leaders should be well-versed in statecraft, adapt to changing circumstances, and make calculated decisions to ensure the survival and prosperity of their state. Separation of ethics and politics. I argued for a separation of ethics and politics. While ethics and morality have their place in private life, leaders should be willing to set aside moral constraints when necessary to ensure the stability and security of the state. Pragmatic diplomacy. Diplomacy and alliances should be used as tools to protect the state's interests. Flexibility in diplomacy, including forming alliances of convenience, can be crucial in the pursuit of power. It's important to note that my ideas have been subject to various interpretations and criticisms over the centuries. Some see them as a cynical endorsement of ruthless behavior, while others view them as a pragmatic guide to navigating the complexities of politics. Ultimately, my work has sparked ongoing debates about the role of ethics and morality in governance.
In The Prince, you famously argued that the ends justify the means. How do you justify morally questionable actions in politics? And do you believe this approach is still relevant today?
In The Prince, I indeed argued that the ends justify the means in the context of politics. This means that leaders may sometimes need to use morally questionable actions or methods to achieve their political goals, particularly when the survival and stability of the state are at stake. The justification for this perspective lies in the belief that leaders have a primary duty to protect and preserve the state. Politics, in my view, is often a realm of power struggles, competition, and conflict. In such an environment, leaders may face situations where making ethically uncomfortable decisions, such as using deception or force, becomes necessary to maintain the security and well-being of their people. It's important to note that my writings were a product of the tumultuous political climate of Renaissance Italy, where city-states were in constant competition and warfare. My advice was tailored to the challenges of that era, and I emphasized the importance of political realism and adaptability. However, whether this approach is relevant today remains a subject of debate. Many modern political thinkers and ethicists argue for the importance of moral principles and human rights in governance. They believe that leaders should adhere to ethical standards even in the face of political challenges. Others still find elements of my philosophy relevant, particularly in situations where state security is a top priority. Tamari, Zhu, Lap. Ultimately, the question of whether the ends can ever truly justify morally questionable means in politics remains a complex and contentious one, and it continues to be a topic of philosophical and ethical discussion.
Machiavelli, the name that rings through history's halls. His wisdom on politics, ambition, and grandiose walls. He told us that power's the ultimate prize, but ethics and strategy let that wisdom rise. Machiavelli, the mastermind of the game. In politics and leadership, he left his name. Strategic thinking, it's all in the art. Balancing virtue and power from the very start. The prince was his guide, his timeless tone, with lessons for leaders in every zone. The ends justified means a contentious creed. In a world of power where ideas breed. Machiavelli, the mastermind of the game. In politics and leadership, he left his name. Strategic thinking, it's all in the art. Balancing virtue and power from the very start.
Your work emphasizes the importance of appearing virtuous rather than being truly virtuous. How can modern political leaders strike the right balance between appearing virtuous and achieving their objective?
The concept of appearing virtuous rather than being truly virtuous, as discussed in The Prince, is rooted in the idea that political leaders often need to navigate the complexities of perception and image to achieve their objectives. Striking the right balance between appearing virtuous and achieving one's goals in modern politics can be challenging, but is essential. Here are some considerations. Transparency and integrity. While the art of appearing virtuous may involve strategic actions, it's important for modern leaders to maintain a baseline of transparency and integrity. Being honest with the public and adhering to ethical standards can help build trust over the long term. Public relations and messaging. Effective communication and public relations play a significant role. Leaders should focus on crafting messages that resonate with their constituents while also aligning with their policy goals. Clear and consistent messaging can help shape a positive public perception. Ethical decision-making. Leaders should strive to make ethical decisions whenever possible. When faced with challenging choices, they should weigh the potential consequences and consider the broader impact on society. Adapting to changing circumstances. Modern leaders should be adaptable and responsive to changing circumstances. Flexibility in decision-making and a willingness to adjust strategies when necessary can help maintain public trust. Long-term vision. Leaders should prioritize long-term objectives over short-term gains. Building a legacy of ethical leadership and a commitment to the well-being of the nation can lead to lasting positive perceptions. Accountability and ethics oversight. Establishing mechanisms for accountability and ethics oversight can help ensure that leaders and public officials act in accordance with ethical standards. This can include independent ethics commissions and legal checks and balances. In today's interconnected and information-rich world, the public is often more informed and engaged than ever before. Leaders should recognize the importance of public opinion and consider the consequences of their actions, not only in terms of immediate political gain, but also in terms of their legacy and the well-being of the nation. Striking the right balance between appearing virtuous and achieving objectives involves a delicate interplay of ethical considerations, strategic decision-making, and effective communication. Ultimately, the most successful leaders are those who can navigate these complexities while maintaining the trust and confidence of their constituents.
You've been criticized for advocating ruthless power politics. Are there any limits to the pursuit of power, or should leaders be willing to do whatever it takes to maintain and expand their influence?
In my political writings, I did emphasize the pragmatic aspects of politics and the sometimes harsh realities of governance. However, it's important to clarify that I did not advocate for an unrestricted pursuit of power without any moral or ethical constraints. While I believed in the necessity of making calculated decisions to maintain and expand influence, I also recognized the importance of certain limits and ethical boundaries. Here are some key points regarding the pursuit of power and its limits. Ethical constraints. Leaders should not abandon their ethical principles and moral values in the pursuit of power. There are ethical boundaries that should not be crossed, such as actions that involve unnecessary harm, cruelty, or violations of fundamental human rights. Rule of law. The rule of law should be upheld. Leaders should operate within the legal framework of their society and respect the principles of justice and due process. Accountability. Leaders should be accountable for their actions. This includes transparency, oversight, and mechanisms for holding leaders responsible for their decisions. Public consent. The consent and support of the governed are essential in any legitimate political system. Leaders should consider the will of the people and seek their approval for significant decisions. Long-term consequences. Pursuing power without considering the long-term consequences can lead to instability and social unrest. Leaders should evaluate the potential impact of their actions on the stability and well-being of the state. International relations. In the realm of international relations, leaders should adhere to principles of diplomacy, cooperation, and respect for the sovereignty of other nations. In summary, while I recognize the complexities of political leadership and the need for pragmatic decision-making, I did not advocate for an unfettered pursuit of power. There are indeed limits to the pursuit of power, and leaders should be guided by ethical principles. The rule of law, public consent, accountability, and consideration of the long-term consequences of their actions. Striking the right balance between pragmatism and ethical conduct is a challenging but necessary task for responsible leadership.
Machiavelli, you have advised leaders on the art of war. Can you share your thoughts on how modern governments should approach military conflicts and national defense?
Certainly. While my writings on the art of war were rooted in the context of the Renaissance, some principles from that era remain relevant to the modern approach to military conflicts and national defense. Here are a few considerations for modern governments. Diplomacy and negotiation. The first and most important principle is the pursuit of diplomatic solutions whenever possible. War should always be a last resort. Modern governments should engage in diplomacy and negotiations to resolve conflicts peacefully and diplomatically. And preparedness and defense. A strong national defense is essential. Governments should maintain well-trained and equipped armed forces to deter potential aggressors and protect their sovereignty. Defensive capabilities should be prioritized to ensure the security of the nation. You can't if theoring that no alliance building. Forming strategic alliances with other nations can enhance a country's security. Alliances can provide support and deter potential adversaries. Modern governments should carefully consider their alliances and partnerships. Intelligence and information. In the modern era, intelligence gathering and information warfare play a crucial role. Governments should invest in intelligence agencies and cyber defense capabilities to gather information, monitor threats, and protect against cyber attacks. Public support and transparency. Leaders should ensure that military actions have the support of the public and that they are conducted transparently. Open communication with the public about the goals and objectives of military operations is essential to maintain public trust. Ethical conduct. Modern governments should adhere to international laws and ethical standards in military conflicts. War crimes and violations of human rights must be avoided at all costs. Post-conflict planning. Planning for the aftermath of military conflicts is crucial. Governments should have strategies for stabilizing and rebuilding regions affected by conflict to prevent further instability. Conflict resolution. Efforts should be made to resolve conflicts through international organizations and mechanisms, such as the United Nations, to prevent escalation and promote peaceful solutions. Technology and innovation. Advancements in technology and military capabilities should be leveraged for the defense of the nation. Modern governments should invest in research and development to stay at the forefront of military technology. Public engagement. Engaging the public in discussions about national defense policies and strategies can help ensure that decisions align with the values and priorities of the nation. In summary, the principles of diplomacy, preparedness, alliances, and ethical conduct remain relevant in the modern approach to military conflicts and national defense. While the nature of warfare has evolved, The importance of peaceful solutions, responsible leadership, and the well-being of citizens should always be at the forefront of government decisions related to defense and security.
Prince and his closes, his books of fame. He played the power game, but he ain't to blame. The ends justify the means, that's what he said. But ethics and leadership he kept in his head. Wrote. A prince and discloses his books of fame. He played the power game, but he ain't to blame. The ends justify the means, that's what he said. But ethics and leadership he kept in his head. No. He said we both love fear, a delicate art. A leader's gotta know how to play their part. In diplomacy and war, his lessons apply, adapt to the circumstances.
You famously wrote that it is better to be feared than loved. Do you still believe that's true, or do you think leaders today should strive for a different balance between fear and love?
The statement, "It is better to be feared than loved," is often quoted from my writings, particularly from the Prince. However, it's important to understand the context in which it was written and to recognize that my views on leadership and governance were pragmatic and rooted in the political realities of the time. In the context of the Renaissance, where Italy was divided into various city-states and power struggles were common, I argued that a ruler should prioritize maintaining control and stability. Being feared in this context meant instilling a sense of authority and deterrence to prevent internal and external threats to one's rule. It did not necessarily imply cruelty or tyranny, but rather the necessity of strong leadership. However, it's crucial to note that my views were not prescriptive for all times and situations. Leadership styles should be adapted to the circumstances and values of a given society. In more modern and democratic contexts, leaders often strive for a different balance between fear and love, focusing on principles such as trust, accountability, transparency, and ethical conduct. Today, effective leadership often involves building trust and support among the governed rather than relying solely on fear. Leaders are expected to be responsive to the needs and aspirations of their constituents and to act in accordance with democratic principles and the rule of law. So, while the statement about fear and love may have had relevance in a specific historical context, contemporary leaders should consider a broader set of principles and values when determining their approach to leadership.
In your view, can a leader be both ethical and effective? Is it possible to be a good leader in the Machiavellian sense?
In my writings, I emphasize the importance of effective leadership, often focusing on the practicalities of governance and the preservation of power, while I acknowledge the need for rulers to make difficult decisions that may not always align with traditional moral standards. I did not advocate for unethical behavior as an end in itself. The question of whether a leader can be both ethical and effective is a complex one and depends on various factors, including the circumstances, values, and expectations of a society. Here are a few considerations. Ethical leadership. Ethical leadership involves adhering to moral principles, being accountable, and acting in the best interests of one's constituents. Leaders who prioritize ethical conduct can earn the trust and respect of their followers, which can contribute to long-term stability and effectiveness. Balancing ethical and practical considerations. Leaders often face situations where ethical principles may come into tension with practical considerations. Striking the right balance between these factors can be challenging, but is essential for responsible leadership. Effective leaders find ways to navigate these complexities while upholding ethical standards. Ethical leadership and the modern world. In contemporary democratic societies, there is a growing emphasis on ethical leadership. Leaders are expected to be accountable, transparent, and responsive to the needs and values of their constituents. Ethical leadership can enhance a leader's effectiveness by fostering public support and cooperation. Ethical leadership in history. Throughout history, there have been leaders who combined effectiveness with ethical conduct. These leaders have left positive legacies and are often celebrated for their contributions to society. Ultimately, whether a leader can be both ethical and effective depends on their choices, the context in which they lead, and the values and expectations of the society they serve. While my writings have been influential in discussions of leadership and governance, contemporary leaders should consider a broader range of ethical principles and values to guide their actions.
Machiavellianism is often associated with cunning and deceit. How can leaders apply your principles without crossing ethical boundaries or resorting to dishonesty?
The association of Machiavellianism with cunning and deceit is a common misconception that stems from a narrow interpretation of my writings. While I did emphasize the importance of effective leadership and the necessity of making difficult decisions, my works did not promote dishonesty or unethical behavior as an end in itself. Leaders can apply some of the principles from my writings without crossing ethical boundaries by considering the following: realism and pragmatism. My writings encourage leaders to be realistic and pragmatic in their approach to governance. This means assessing situations objectively, making decisions based on the available information, and considering the best interests of the state and its citizens. Ethical conduct. Effective leadership should not conflict with ethical conduct. Leaders can prioritize ethical behavior, transparency, and accountability while still pursuing effective governance. Ethical principles should guide decision-making and actions. Balance of interests. Leaders should weigh the interests of the state, its citizens, and the broader community when making decisions. Balancing these interests can help ensure that decisions align with ethical standards and promote the common good. Responsiveness and adaptability. Effective leaders are responsive to changing circumstances and adaptable in their strategies. This does not require dishonesty, but rather the ability to adjust policies and actions in light of new information and evolving challenges. Public engagement. Leaders can build trust and legitimacy by engaging with the public and seeking their input. In democratic societies, public participation is a fundamental aspect of governance. Ethical advisors. Surrounding oneself with advisors who prioritize ethics and ethical conduct can help leaders make informed and principled decisions. Accountability mechanisms. Leaders should establish accountability mechanisms to ensure that their actions align with ethical standards. These mechanisms may include oversight bodies, checks and balances, and a commitment to the rule of law. Long-term perspective. Leaders should consider the long-term consequences of their decisions. Pursuing short-term gains at the expense of long-term stability and ethical standards is not advisable. In summary, leaders can apply principles from my writings in a responsible and ethical manner by prioritizing the common good, considering ethical conduct, and making informed, principled decisions. It is possible to be an effective leader without resorting to dishonesty or unethical behavior, provided that leaders are guided by ethical principles and the best interests of the state and its citizens.
Ladies and gentlemen, gather around. Because today we're diving into the world of Niccolo Machiavelli, the mastermind behind the prince and my middle school nemesis, Peter. Because trust me, I needed some Machiavellian wisdom to survive that bully. Listen, folks, middle school, like being thrown into a lion's den, and Peter was the king of that jungle. I had the Prince by Machiavelli back then. I would have been a certified diplomat at age 12. You know, Peter had a strategy, and it was a slaw as they come. He'd surround himself with loyal goons, just like Machiavelli's ideal court. I couldn't even use the restroom without going through his gang of bathroom monitors. Machiavelli says, all warfare is based on deception. Well, Peter's approach was pretty Machiavellian. He pretended to be a friend one day, and the next, boom, you're holding his lunch tray while he bragged about his PlayStation. I read Machiavelli's The Prince later in life, and I gotta say, some of his advice would have been golden back then. It's better to be feared than loved, he said. And you bet Peter had that one down. I feared him like a math test I didn't study for. And I knew I had to outwit Peter. I mean, what Machiavelli do? So I started spreading rumors. It's like the prince advised. I tell folks that Peter secretly collected pink heiresses. It was my tiny act of rebellion, and I thought I was clever. Little did I know, Peter actually liked pink erasers, but he decided to roll with it. You know, Machiavelli also said, the ends justify the means. Well, my means were not so harmless pranks, but my end game was making Peter laugh. And after a while, we actually became friends, even though our friendship was as unpredictable as Machiavelli's political advice. Middle school was like a battlefield, and I was just trying to survive. I didn't become a Machiavellian genius, but I did learn that even the most ruthless bullies can be human. They might just have an odd taste in erasers.
In this common journey through the labyrinth of middle school and the wisdom of Machiavelli, Ricky Razor shows that even in the toughest of situations, a little humor and a touch of clever strategy can help you navigate the trickiest of bullies. Because let's face it, life is one big comedy special, and sometimes you just have to roll with the punches or pink erasers.
Your advice in The Prince is often interpreted as being directed toward princes and monarchs. Can your principles be applied in modern democracies? And if so, how?
Yes, the principles outlined in The Prince can be applied in modern democracies, but they must be adapted to the different context and values of democratic societies. While The Prince was written during a time of monarchy, many of the underlying principles relate to leadership, governance, and the pursuit of political goals. Here's how these principles can be applied in modern democracies. Effective leadership. Modern democracies require effective leadership just as much as monarchies did. Leaders must be skilled in decision-making, communication, and policy implementation to address the needs and challenges of their constituents. Realism and pragmatism. Leaders in democracies should adopt a realistic and pragmatic approach to governance, considering the complex realities of the political landscape and the best interests of their nation. Responsiveness to public opinion. In democracies, leaders must be responsive to public opinion and the will of the people. This includes engaging with the public, seeking their input, and taking their concerns into account when making decisions. Balancing interests. Leaders in democratic societies must balance the interests of various groups, stakeholders, and the broader community when crafting policies and making decisions. Transparency and accountability. Transparency and accountability are essential in democracies. Leaders should be transparent about their actions and decisions, and they should be subject to accountability mechanisms such as elections and checks and balances. Ethical conduct. Ethical conduct is paramount in modern democracies. Leaders should adhere to ethical principles, uphold the rule of law, and act in accordance with democratic values. Adaptability. Leaders must be adaptable and able to adjust their strategies in response to changing circumstances and the evolving needs of their society. Public engagement. Engaging with the public and seeking their input through democratic processes such as elections, referendums, and consultations is a fundamental aspect of governance in democracies. Long-term perspective. Leaders should consider the long-term consequences of their decisions and policies, aiming for policies that promote the well-being and stability of their nation over time. Building coalitions. Just as monarchs needed to build alliances with other states, leaders in democracies often need to build coalitions within their political systems to advance their agendas. In summary, the principles of effective leadership, realism, and pragmatism, as well as the focus on ethics and accountability, can be applied in modern democracies. However, leaders in democratic societies must adapt these principles to align with democratic values, public participation, and the rule of law. The key is to strike a balance between effective governance and democratic principles while respecting the will of the people.
You argue that fortune favors the bold. How can leaders take calculated risks in politics without risking their positions or causing instability?
Taking calculated risks in politics can be a delicate endeavor, as leaders must navigate a complex landscape while ensuring stability and preserving their positions. Here are some strategies for leaders to take calculated risks without jeopardizing their positions or causing instability. And thorough analysis. Leaders should conduct a comprehensive analysis of the potential risks and benefits of a particular course of action. This includes assessing the potential impact on the economy, society, and political stability. Consultation. Engaging with advisors, experts, and stakeholders is crucial. Leaders should seek diverse perspectives and input to make informed decisions. Communication. Transparency and effective communication with the public are essential. Leaders should clearly explain their rationale for taking a particular risk and the potential benefits it could bring. Public support. Leaders should gauge public opinion and support for the proposed course of action. Building a consensus or at least demonstrating that the risk is in the public interest can help mitigate backlash. Contingency plans. Leaders should develop well-thought-out contingency plans to address potential challenges or negative outcomes. Being prepared for different scenarios can reduce the risk of instability. With R, gradual implementation. Some risks can be taken in a gradual and phased manner, allowing leaders to monitor the impact and adjust their approach as needed. International relations. In cases where risks involve foreign policy, leaders should consider the potential reactions of other nations and work to minimize international tensions. Legal and ethical considerations. Ensure that the proposed action aligns with legal and ethical standards. Leaders should avoid actions that may be viewed as illegal or unethical. Coalition building. Building support within the political system, including alliances with other parties or leaders, can help leaders maintain stability and protect their positions. Assessing timing. Timing can be critical. Leaders should consider whether the current political and economic climate is conducive to taking a particular risk. So, listening to experts. Pay attention to experts in relevant fields such as economics, diplomacy, and security. Their insights can provide valuable guidance. Accountability. Leaders should be accountable for their decisions. If a risk does not yield the expected benefits or results in negative consequences, leaders should take responsibility and adjust their course. Public relations. Effective public relations and crisis management strategies can help leaders manage any fallout from taking calculated risks. It's important to note that every political context is unique, and the level of risk that can be tolerated varies. Leaders should carefully assess the specific circumstances they face and make decisions that prioritize the well-being and stability of their nation, while managing calculated risk.
We've been on a journey, it's been quite a ride. Chopping game with legends from the east to the west side. Machiavelli's wisdom, the bumpy street cred, and Tupac's thug life will keep the streets fed. Dope interviews, we bring the heat. Dope interview, run these YouTube streets. We got people from the past that's not real, it's a spoof. Just some shit to make you laugh. Dope interviews, we bring the heat. Dope interview, run these YouTube streets. We got people from the past that's not real, it's a spoof. Just some shit to make you laugh.